Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the monthly economic briefing presented by the Kenan Institute of Private Enterprise at UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School. I'm External Affairs Interim Director Rob Knapp, and it's great to have you with us this morning. We've got a busy 30 minutes ahead of us. The jobs report is out. It's 175,000 jobs added, so employment growing, but at a little slower clip than we're used to seeing lately, a little closer to the kind of controlled growth rather than red hot growth that folks like the Fed would like to be seeing. Speaking of the Fed, they were in action earlier this week, holding interest rates at where they are. So we have a lot of things to discuss, and we're going to have our research director, Professor Camelia Kunin, with us here in a moment to talk about those things and also about consumer confidence, which is an area of expertise for her. She's going to talk about those numbers in relationship to some of the other economic numbers that we're seeing. So lots to get to this morning. We'll give you a quick run through of how this runs. Professor Kunin will be on in a moment. She's going to give a presentation of roughly 15 to 20 minutes. The rest of our 30 minutes will go to questions from you. We're interactive here. So if you'd like to ask a question, you could submit one at any time using the Q&A function at the bottom center of your screen. If you're with us by phone today, you can also submit a question. Feel free to email that to me. I'm at rob_knapp@kenan-flagler.unc.edu. The shows usually go about 30 minutes. Sometimes we'll run a little bit longer if we need to. So hold on and let's see where we end up today. So I'm happy to introduce today's presenter. She is our research director at the Kenan Institute, Professor Camelia Kunin. Cami, welcome and good morning.
Good morning. Let's see. Maybe we can get the video up.
Yep. Hi.
Hi. Good to see you, Rob. Good to see everybody who's attending. Well, I guess I'm going to take it from here.
Please do.
Very good. So I have to say that I was quite happy when I saw the numbers just released today by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So as Rob said, in terms of changes in non-farm payrolls, we saw an increase in April of 175,000 jobs. This is an increase a little bit below what was expected, which was 240,000. And it's definitely a change in payrolls that's lower than what we've seen in March and a couple of other months before that. And I take this actually as really good news. As we all know, the concern in the U.S. has been about inflation. Inflation seems to be quite sticky. It's not yet a 2% number that the Fed wants it to be at. And a large driver of concerns about inflation is having a very frothy labor market. So this change in non-farm payrolls that came in lower than expected and lower than what we've seen in the previous few months is actually really good news, in that it indicates that there's maybe some softening or cooling off, if you wish, in the labor market. I also see another really good change on this in terms of these numbers from the past, which is the month-to-month change in hourly earnings. We expected a 0.3% increase month-to-month in hourly earnings, and that number actually came in at 0.2%. So the lower this number is, of course, the lower will be the increase in wages, and therefore there should be lower pressure in terms of inflation coming from a labor force that gets very high wage gains. So from this number, I'm hoping that we're going to continue to see a slowing down in terms of wage growth, and we'll continue to see the labor market cooling off in the sense of having payroll numbers that look more like historical numbers rather than 300,000 and more, which is what we've seen in the past few months. In terms of unemployment, that number ticked up a little bit from 3.8% to 3.9%. It's still really close to basically 50-year lows. So we're looking good in terms of unemployment. Um, this cooling off in the labor market doesn't have to come with a recession, right? It doesn't have to come with high unemployment. It just perhaps means that we're going to have a sustainable pace of growth in the economy. The labor force participation rate is 62.7%. It's unchanged, and we'll talk a little bit more about that number, whether we can get it to be higher in the future, what's going on there. So, as I was saying, if you look at the pattern in terms of job growth over time, the number for this month is really good. It's lower than what we've seen for the previous 4 months or so, and it gives us hope for a little bit of cooling off in the labor market. The one thing I didn't mention on the previous slide was that in terms of the average weekly hours worked, that number is pretty stable. So people are they're providing as much work as before. Unemployment is, as I said, very close to 50-year lows, even though it ticked up a little bit this month. And so this is again a situation where if you just look at the unemployment number, you'd be concerned about inflation-related pressures coming from the labor market. But again, you have to look at the bigger picture. You have to look at the pace of growth in terms of payroll. You have to also look at figures coming from JOLTS, and we'll touch on those in a second, in terms of job openings, in terms of quits and hires, and just to see other look at the frothiness of the labor market through other numbers than just the unemployment number per se. So I mentioned that the participation rate in the labor force has been pretty steady and relatively low actually compared to pre-COVID levels. Ideally, you want more people to be in the labor force. That would help with, again, reducing sort of pressures on wages. That increase in labor force participation probably is not going to come from workers prime age. Those participation rates are pretty high. Maybe we'll see more women joining the labor force. We've had a pretty positive impact actually on participation rate that's coming from immigration. So in the past year or so, a lot of people who are not US born joined the labor force, and that really has helped our numbers. So maybe that will continue, and that will be a positive impact on the economy. In large part, the reason why overall the participation rate is not super high is coming from older individuals, people who are 55 years and older. Their participation rate dropped after COVID, as you can see in this picture, and it didn't really recover. So that, combined with the fact that the U.S. population, people born here, it's aging quite a bit. This is telling me that unless we're going to increase maybe immigration, we're not going to be able to push up the participation rate a lot, because we have a lot of aging individuals who would just, we'll have more of them over time, and they won't do not show an interest in being in the labor market. I mentioned the JOLTS data. I think it's super useful to look at this, again, to get a sense of just how tight the labor market still is. So we have seen a very steady decline in job openings over time. They've been trending down. In March, the figure for job openings came at 8.5 million. It's the lowest that we've seen in more than a year. So this is good. It means that firms show a little bit of caution. They're still hiring, but they're doing so, or they're interested in hiring, but they're being cautious about it. And also, workers are cautious in terms of their labor market activity. We also see in the JOLTS data that the quits rate has been declining over time. You're not seeing that in this particular picture. I'm just going to tell you in words. But yeah, the quits rate going down over time means that people are less inclined to basically try to hop from one job to another. They're staying put. They're more likely to stay put. And again, this is seen as a sign of caution from the workers. Um, and that perhaps indicates that, again, the labor market is not as tight, is not as frothy as it used to be. And so inflationary pressures from the labor market are maybe not as uh, high of a concern as they used to be. One other sort of number to look at, again, to get a sense of just how tight the labor market is the number of job openings per unemployed worker. That number was at a peak of 2 in March 2022. So there were 2 job openings per unemployed worker at that time. Thankfully, that number has been going down. Right now, it's at 1.25. This, again, it's a steady decline, which indicates, again, that the labor market is getting a little bit less frothy. Workers and firms seem to be cautious, but not, there's no clear sign of danger here. It's just caution. Another number that's should give us some confidence about basically a soft landing. Things are not going as frothy as they used to be, and we're gonna have a soft landing. Is this number about real GDP growth for Q1? We have the first release of this number. It may be adjusted later, but it came in at 1.6% annualized GDP growth for Q1 in 2024. It's a much more sustainable pace of growth than what we would have inferred had we looked at, for example, the number for GDP growth in the third quarter of 2023. That number was 4.9%, and again, that was just too high, unsustainable pace of growth without being concerned about inflation. So I'm looking at the GDP growth rates. I'm looking at the JOLTS numbers. I'm looking at this decline that we just saw today in terms of hourly wages, month on month. That growth rate dropped from 0.3% to 0.2%. And I'm thinking this is good. The economy is slowing down a little bit, and this is exactly what the Fed wanted to see. Now, that being said, there are still some concerning signs or concerning numbers. This picture shows you how wages have grown over time and also how inflation has looked like over time. And the blue line, if you look at it versus the orange line, blue line is wages. Orange line is the CPI, one measure of inflation. You'll see that in the past basically year or so, wage growth, it's been slowing down, which is, again, a good thing, but it's still above inflation rate. So if people's wages grow faster than inflation, even by a little bit, this might help spur basically consumption, consumer demand. So I will show you soon some data that indicates that indeed people have been spending quite a bit. But if this pressure coming from consumer demand stays on, that is, if wages continue to grow at a pace that's above the inflation rate, this might again push up inflation. Now, given today's number for our average hourly earnings growth rate, I'm actually quite optimistic that we're going to see slower wage growth. But it's, it hasn't realized quite yet. We need to see an update of this picture basically in a little bit to understand our wages now growing basically closer to inflation rates and instead of being high above them. Just a few days ago, we got another number that pushed against this idea that wages are, cooling off or slowing down in terms of growth dramatically. This is the employment cost index. It's another way to think about wage growth and or the cost of the growth of labor costs. And that number, it did come down from more than 5% year-on-year change about a year and a half ago, but it's still stubbornly above 4%. So when Chairman Powell was talking earlier this week about inflationary pressures and how they don't seem to to abate quite as fast as we want them to. One of the numbers that probably came in that in his argument was this number, this employment cost index. It's just not. It's sort of flat, you see, and above 4%. But again, based on today's change in the average hourly earnings growth rate from the past, I'm actually quite positive that we're going to see this line drop in the next few months. This is another picture that basically makes this a similar point, that inflation, in terms of its pace of growth, was looking pretty good. Late last year, we thought was going to continue to decline, but early this year, it picked up a little bit, and so the Fed was concerned. And at the FOMC meeting this week, we all heard that the more data is needed, more evidence is needed before we're convinced that we have won against high inflation. Inflation it's still based on the core PCE index, which is one of the favored measures by the Fed. It's at about 2.8% right now, still above the 2% target rate. So with all this information, the Fed said, we're not ready yet to cut interest rates. And we're gonna wait. And as a result, they left the Fed funds rate unchanged a couple of days ago at 5.25 to 5.5%. So we are in this environment where indeed we have very low unemployment, or very high employment rate, if you wish, which is what this picture is showing you in the orange line, very high employment rate. And we've had sustained relatively high interest rates. And yet, the GDP growth is pretty healthy. Payroll number growth is pretty healthy. So, and now we're seeing, again, based on this monthly change in the pace of hourly earnings growth, I think we're seeing signs of there being some cooling in the labor market, and the JOLTS numbers, the job openings numbers also indicate that. So, in my opinion, I think we are still quite able to accomplish a soft landing. If I were to take a guess, I would say we're probably going to see a slowing down in consumer demand later this year. And we're going to continue to see wage growth diminishing, inflation diminishing slowly, and so I'm guessing we probably will see a cut in interest rates, maybe two by the end of this year. The markets actually give it about an 80% chance that we're going to see at least a rate cut of 0.25%, 25 basis points by the end of this year. Now, things again don't look terrible; they look quite decent actually, and you can measure this also by looking at the thing that's called the misery index, and it's basically it's an indicator that's driven by two things: the unemployment level and inflation levels. And if you look at this picture, the misery index was really high. It was COVID hit, of course, unsurprisingly, but it's been trending down. So in terms of objective data based on unemployment and inflation, things are getting better. And the question is, do households see that? Do they understand it? Do we see that consumer expectations or sentiment, consumer sentiment, doesn't match what we see in the data? And there's been a narrative in the press that consumer confidence numbers are just completely de-linked from the economic reality that we're seeing right now. And then I want to take a few minutes to push back against that argument. I think that consumers' sentiment or confidence is pretty well grounded in what's happening right here. So you see two trend lines. One, the blue one comes from the Conference Board. It's their consumer confidence index. The orange one is from the University of Michigan. It's the consumer sentiment index. And if you look at the Conference Board number, the blue line, right, it was pretty high right before the pandemic, and then it dropped evidently, and then it came back up, and it's been steady. There was a little tick down this month in consumer confidence, but that blue line is not super far from where it was before the pandemic. In terms of the Michigan consumer sentiment, you see that's been increasing steadily in the past few months, but it is quite far from the peak of that orange line before the pandemic. So you'd say then Michigan is all wrong. We should look at this data. Why hasn't consumer confidence recovered? We've seen that the economy's done pretty well. And the answer is actually that if you look at the questions asked by the Michigan survey, the focus of those questions is on things that relate to inflation. So in an environment like what we've seen for the past, couple of years, when inflation is a big concern, of course, when you ask people, hey, is this a good time to buy a house or a car? They'll think, oh, goodness, prices have gone up like crazy. It's not a good time, right? So you're going to see a more negative sentiment from Michigan because of the questions asked of those participants relative to the consumer confidence survey by the conference board, where the questions are more related to the labor market. There, the questions are along the lines of, is it easy to find a job? And of course, in the labor market we've seen for the past couple of years, it's been easy to find a job. So I want you to understand like why, the fact that these two lines, the blue line and the orange line, they don't look the same. It's happening because people are asked different questions by these confidence or sentiment surveys. One type of question is about labor market, which has been pretty good, and the other type of question is about inflation, which again has been concerning. Now, there's something interesting in the conference board data. You can split the questions that people get asked in two categories: questions about how you presently are doing, and how presently the economy is doing, versus what do you think is going to happen in the future, in the next 6 months to a year. And if you look at this picture, it shows you that in terms of the present situation, how things are right now to you and people around you, the respondents are actually pretty content. But in terms of expectations for the future, they are not looking as optimistic. They're not looking as happy. So why is that? Well, it's because of a couple of reasons. First of all, if you ask yourself, how am I doing now? A lot of us probably will feel, relatively good because our net worth for most of us actually has been on a pretty nice trend for the past year or so. This picture shows that the net worth for people across the wealth distribution has increased since about a year ago. So our assets minus liabilities, that number that's been looking better for all of us, so we feel richer. So presently we're, pretty happy, which is what I think that confidence, that conference board present situation number captures. Another thing to look at is, the value of our homes. For a lot of Americans, a lot of their wealth is captured by the value of their home, and homes have increased in prices dramatically, of course, since COVID. There's been in the past few months, a little bit of a plateauing in home prices, but still, well, many of us who are homeowners sit on an asset that's worth way more than just a few years ago. So, people's net worth, people's assets are worth more. And probably this has impacted consumer spending, and which we've seen grow quite a bit actually over time. This is a picture that's showing you in the blue line the rate of growth of spending, personal consumption expenditures in real terms. The orange line is the growth rate over time in real personal income. And basically that blue line has a pretty good slope. So consumer spending has been healthy, has been growing in real terms over time. Now, the orange line tells you that while people were spending more and more in real times, yes, they were also earning more and more in real times, but the pace of spending growth was higher than the pace of real income growth, right? So if this is happening, you're depleting your savings, right? Or you're maybe borrowing against those assets that increased in value. So when people are having to think about the future, which is the other piece of that conference board's index, thinking about the future, they might be saying, well, we've been spending a little bit faster than our real incomes would have allowed for it. Probably we have drawn down some of our savings, and that's a little concerning. And indeed, there's data just came out of JP Morgan Institute that shows that for a lot of people, especially lower income individuals, all of those excess savings that came from pandemic stimulus money, they're gone, right? And people have reverted to their normal savings rate. And this is the data from JP Morgan is actually matched very nicely by the personal savings rate data that we get from the government. And if you look at this personal saving rate, nowadays is going back to a pretty lowish number. That's in line with historical trends. And so basically people are back to before the COVID excess savings. So households probably are indeed concerned about their future situation because their savings are a little bit lower. They might be concerned about wage growth. Remember that they're not hopping job from one job to the other as much as before based on the quits rates from JOLTS. So households are cautious. The one last thing I'll say about data from these consumer surveys is it should be good news for the Fed and everybody else. This is data from Michigan. It's showing you what are people's inflation expectations 1 year ahead and 5 years ahead. And what I want you to take from this picture is that both of these expectations for short run and long run inflation are well anchored. They're around 3%. It's a number that's above the 2% Fed target, but it's basically in line with historical expectations of consumers. So we're in an environment now where households expect inflation to not be at just unbelievably high levels. They expect it to be where they always thought it would be, which is about 3%. So just to wrap up, I think that the picture is pretty good, actually. The economy is in solid shape. We're cooling off a little bit in the labor market, which is good because we don't want to have inflation pressures coming from very fast growth rates and wages. We still have very low unemployment, but excess savings have been reduced quite a bit. This is going to push down consumer demand, which is a good thing again, just to get to a soft landing. It's nice to have cautious consumers who are still sitting on assets that are worth much more than a few years ago. So in my view, inflation I think will continue to abate. I was really glad to see that again, that weekly wage change today in today's report, lower month to month increase in wages, and I expect we'll see some rate cuts late this year.
Great. Thank you very much, Cami. That's a lot of information on a fairly good morning, it seems. We had a few more categories that sounded like the Fed is going to like this, as opposed to it's a mixed message or this is going to worry the Fed. So an interesting morning all around. And thanks for your insight into consumer confidence and consumer sentiment too. I had a couple of people reach out to me this week and say they were really interested in hearing about that. So I think it was a well-timed opportunity to talk about that a little bit. I guess we will go straight into questions now. Let me remind folks, if you have questions, and I've got room for one or two more, go ahead and use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to let me know, or you can email me at rob_nat@kenan-flagler.unc.edu. I forgot to mention this before, but if you were with the media, if you could just put your organization's name into the question so we can make sure to get to those. First question comes from Matt Boyle at Bloomberg, and he said that just one category, health and private education, accounted for over half of the entire gain in payrolls. So do you think that the slowdown in hiring across the economy is maybe even softer than the headline numbers suggest?
Yes, I think that's right, Matt. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And is that generally the case if one category stands out from everything else, that may be an indication that things are a little more pronounced than we're seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, just the math works out that way, right?
Right. Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Matt, for the question. So in terms of, we've talked about participation rate. That's been an ongoing theme. And it seems more and more that immigration seems to be one long-term sustainable answer in terms of the other things that we see, who else might be joining the workforce, and there don't seem to be a lot of other options. Is that the way you see it going forward? Is that where a lot of our growth is going to come from?
I think that the growth has to come from immigration. I was looking at the numbers for population demographics the other day, and people who are 65 years and older now make up about 20% of the population. They used to make up about 6% of the population about 20 years ago. So it's an aging population. Also, our fertility rate is low by historical numbers, and so we just can't. Native born workers we don't have a lot of those who are still a prime age and able to work. So we need to get workers from somewhere else. And in the short run, of course, we can do more things to in the long run to help having more workers. But in the short run, I think immigration probably will keep being great help.
Demographics are hard to fight.
Yes.
Also, just to be clear, you think that some of the numbers that have been maybe troubling to the Fed, the last inflation report, the general wage growth, that we're going to see those start to mellow out a little bit based on what you're seeing in the report today?
I believe so, yes. I think that today's report is the beginning of a slowing down in wage growth. I think we'll see more of that because households are concerned. They are cautious now. It's one thing to keep spending and buying more things because you've built up this excess, buffer of savings because of the pandemic money. And it's a different thing now to look in your bank account and realize you're pretty low levels of cash because you've burned those savings.
Mm-hmm.
Will you spend this before? Will you keep, increasing your spending at, 0.5% per month, which is what we've seen for the past few months? I don't believe so. I think people are, and people are worried, and that's, I think, where that conference board dip in the confidence measure came from this past month. It's people are worried that from now on they won't have as much money to spend. So you're gonna have this pressure also from where this effect of diminishing consumer demand also probably impact wage growth. It's going to take a few months. It's not going to be immediate, but I think we're on the right path towards just a slowing down pattern towards a steady rate of growth.
Okay, thank you. A quick follow-up on the workforce participation question from Barbara Sennett. Should we also try to encourage older people to rejoin the workforce? We see so many reports anecdotally that older workers are forced or encouraged out because they command higher wages. I would imagine that some things at this point have probably already been tried to bring older workers back into the workforce, but is that something that could possibly move the needle?
About 6 months ago, I was hopeful that we will keep seeing the participation rate of older workers go up to close to pre-pandemic levels. But month after month, we see the same pattern that rate of participation of people who are 55 and older, that's staying low. And it may just be that we won't be able to make much progress in that dimension. Wages, if you think about when have wages grown fast, well, it's happened for the past couple of years, right? I mean, that was probably the time to attract some of these people to come back into the labor force. And it hasn't happened. Going forward, again, I don't expect to see 5% year-on-year wage growth anymore. So the attractiveness of working, I suppose, going forward may not be as high as it was for the past couple of years for anybody, including for older individuals, unfortunately.
Right. Okay, very good. We are at 9:34, so we better close this down. That 30 minutes plus 4 moves fast. So, Professor Kenan, thank you very much for your presentation. It's great to see you again on here and look forward to the next time. Also, thanks to everybody out there for joining us today. We appreciate that. So, for media in the audience, we'd love to continue the conversation. If you have any questions about consumer confidence, consumer sentiment, how these things relate to some of these other economic numbers that we talk about, Professor Coonan is the one to talk to, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to arrange some time for you to talk to her, or anything else that we explore here at the Kenan Institute. Please be in touch. For those of you in the general audience, we'd love to invite you to check out our website. It's a particularly busy time there. We have a lot of pieces going up over the next few weeks on a lot of different topics. So we hope that you will check those out at kenaninstitute.unc.edu. I should also mention that this is the 2-year anniversary of our starting of the briefing. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to all the folks who make this possible. Our experts, Gerald Cohen, Greg Brown, Christian Lundblad, and Camelia Coonan. The guys who push the right Zoom buttons to make all this happen, Corey Powell, Robbie Passel. Robbie also handles our video editing every month. Our graphics wizards, Juan Ryan and Cody Morris, who do a lot of good work very fast each month. And our founding host, Mackenzie Babb. Thanks to all of these folks, and thanks to all of you, whether you were here for the first one of these 2 years ago or today was your first day. We appreciate your participation.
And thank you, Rob. You're a big part of this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So that's it for today. I'm Rob Knapp, and hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thanks.